I am a mother of 5. I really didn't see myself being able to go back to school.
There was a lot of self-doubt.
Cost of higher education, that was a big hurdle for me. Once I found Amazon and all their free education programs, I was hooked.
Amazon's footing the bill for it, so we're gonna take advantage.
I'm able to work towards a degree in computer and electrical engineering.
Network engineering.
Environmental engineering.
It makes me feel confident I can get to the next level. I feel like the sky's the limit.
At BECU, we know that it's people who make all the difference. Because we're not for profit, our most important stakeholders aren't power brokers. They're everyday people, people like you. It's our members who make money meaningful, so we focus on helping them thrive. It's the art student bringing beauty to his community that makes a college loan matter. It's the mother building her family's foundation that makes a mortgage matter. It's people that make BECU matter. People like you.
And now, the Cascade PBS Ideas Festival, featuring journalists, newsmakers, and innovators from around the country in conversation about the issues making headlines. Thank you for joining us for Criminal with Amanda Knox, moderated by Phoebe Judge. Before we begin, a special thank you to our founding sponsor, the Killinger Foundation, and our host sponsor, Amazon. Lastly, events like this one are possible because of the incredible support of our members. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cascade PBS Ideas Festival. I'm Phoebe Judge, host of the Criminal Podcast. In 2009, Amanda Knox was convicted in an Italian court for the murder of her roommate, Meredith Kircher. Years later, she was acquitted and began the process of figuring out what came next. Amanda Knox, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
I want to start with the day you got out of prison in 2011. What do you remember about that day?
Oh, wow. Yeah, so it was the middle of the night, first of all. We got a very, very late in the middle of the night verdict, and I spent almost the entire day in the office of the prison chaplain, Don Salo, who had become my dearest friend in prison. And we talked together, he held my hand, we cried, and he was 100% convinced that I was going home. And that was a big thing for me because at that point in my journey, I didn't have faith in the criminal justice system anymore. It had already failed me once, and so I had absolutely no idea what was going to happen when I walked back into that courtroom. And so it was handed down, I was going home. I was driven back to the prison, not in a prison van like a caged animal, but in a police car, and the entire prison, which I'd been watching on TV, erupted in cheers. Everyone screaming, "Libertà, libertà, libertà," banging pots and pans on the window panes. And I was given a very short amount of time to rush back into my cell, gather a few of my belongings, break my toothbrush, which is customary.
Why?
So you break your toothbrush so that you yourself don't go back to prison. It's a lucky thing, kind of like salt over your shoulder. So you break your own toothbrush, and then when you leave, you also brush your foot against the threshold going out of the prison to carry the next person with you. And then I was put into a car and entered into my born identity phase of my life where I was being chased by paparazzi and helicopters, and that lasted for a while.
I mean, I've always wondered, did you feel like at any moment they can say this is a mistake, once the wheels get up, I'm okay?
I mean, I think that I lived in a state of surreality for a good week. Especially when, again, this born identity phase of my journey, when I had to be driven to a safe house because it was in the middle of the night and the flight to take me home wasn't until the next morning. And so I was driven to this safe house where a secret place outside of Rome some supporter had. And I was there with my mom and an ex-FBI agent who I just met for the first time, who was like our bodyguard. And we finally laid our heads to rest, and I found that I couldn't bring myself to fall asleep, not just because of the adrenaline rush, but I was sitting there in this chair, I'll never forget, just watching my mom sleep. And I was so afraid of closing my eyes because I thought, if I wake up, I'm gonna wake up back in a prison cell. Like, this is all a dream.
Your case was all over the news, all over the world. While you were in prison, how did you experience that celebrity? How much of that did you know was going on?
Yeah, celebrity wouldn't be the word that I would put to it. It wasn't a good thing to be the most famous one in prison. Let's just say that. And there are complicated political nuances to that. I think the biggest and most human level one being that the vast majority of the women that I was imprisoned with were forgotten. No one cared about them. And so they looked at me and saw, politicians coming to the prison to just do a prison visit, but really to come straight to my cell so that they could say that they talked to the infamous Amanda Knox. And of course, everyone followed the case, and it meant that I was living under constant scrutiny even while I was in a prison cell, which made for a very lonely existence, a lonely and often paranoid, hypervigilant existence. To be under that level of scrutiny, I was aware of in the prison environment to a certain extent. But then it was a whole other level to come home to every single news channel having my face and my name, people coming to the airport, and in a lot of times supportive ways. Like, it wasn't just, paparazzi and people, like, it wasn't just me having to show up at a press conference. There were also people like holding up signs saying, "Welcome home, Amanda." My local record store said, "Welcome home, Amanda." And I was just like, what is happening right now? Like, and here I was, like, all these years in prison thinking that I was gonna get to go back to being just local, anonymous, like, Seattle college student. And I very quickly realized that world and that life didn't exist anymore. And I'll be honest, it was hella awkward. It's awkward. It's awkward when people know you for the worst experience of your life. I knew that there was this figure, this idea of Amanda Knox that was out there, this idea of Foxy Knoxy. But I also knew that idea preyed upon or played upon people's expectations or their own, what they were projecting onto that image of me. And so I felt like there was this constant doppelganger version of me that existed between me and other people.
I wonder if one of the things you talk about is how scrutinized every action that you did while you were on trial was looked at. You talk about how you wore a T-shirt on Valentine's Day that said, "All you need is love," and people thought you were being flip. You wrote, in your latest memoir, Free, that when you smiled at your family, you were seen as kind of vamping for the cameras. Or if you didn't smile, you were seen as cold and calculating. And so nothing you could do was right. Your family suggested at one point that you start wearing a cross when you went to court, because they knew how closely you're being watched. What was the cross going to do?
Well, in Italian courtrooms, there's a big cross hanging above the judge, and so it was. They understood that part of what was happening to me was a lost in translation, cultures colliding kind of issue, and they wanted people to see me for who I really was, and they noted that the way that I was being represented was through this very stereotypical misogynistic lens. I was the American girl gone wild. I was the drug-addled whore.
You were what a father wouldn't want their daughter to be.
Absolutely, and I think that the way that the case presented itself to the world was there are two versions of femininity. There is the victim, who was pure and virginal, and then there's the perpetrator, the drug-addled whore. And when these two women come into contact with each other, what inevitably arises is a pornographic murder scene. And there was these assumptions about how women naturally hate other women, which I was just really unprepared for. I mean, I was 20 at the time, so I was really unprepared for the entirety of the thing. But it's taken me a long time to process how Meredith, my roommate and my friend, who met a brutal end at the hands of a man committed this crime, raped and murdered her, how that was twisted into a fantasy about women hating each other and women committing violence against each other.
Did you think when you got home about just disappearing?
Well, that would have been an interesting option were it were available to me. I think that the helicopters following me back from the airport and then for the months afterwards, like, I lived a pretty quiet, low down, trying to be as invisible as possible life.
You tried to disappear. It didn't work.
No.
So you wrote a memoir.
Yeah, I mean, I was still on trial, so I still had a big old target on my back when I wrote the memoir. And I think what also made it difficult was I thought, you know, memoir's happening, I get to finally tell my side of the story because there's been 1 million people out there already, 4 years in prison, where people are putting out there, who is Amanda Knox? What is her real story? What's her sex life? Like, just getting really detailed, intimate about me as a person, not just about the case. And I felt like I needed to put my one voice out there to set the record straight and to clarify some things. And then the Italian justice system decided to overturn my acquittal right when my book came out. And so suddenly any interviews that I might have had that would have been about, oh, tell us your story about being wrongly convicted, turned into, did you or did you not murder your roommate, Meredith Kircher? And I had to go through that whole experience all over again of being interrogated by what I assumed were my authority figures, these people who I had seen on television, grown up watching on television. I didn't know what my relationship was to them. I didn't know, it felt like they had all the power to tell my story, and so I just had to show up and do exactly what they told me, which is the exact same mistake that I had made with the police.
I mean, did you think, you know, you had been released from prison, you were reconvicted of murder, but then you were exonerated. Did you finally think in 2014, listen, this is 2 times now where it's not me, you know, that this would be the end, that people would finally get it?
For the record, if anyone's not clear on what happened, I was convicted and then I was acquitted, and then I was convicted again because they just did the thing all over again. And then the Supreme Court in Italy overturned that and definitively acquitted us. And so it was an 8-year ordeal. And there was that period there between getting out of prison and it being definitively done where I could have been extradited back to Italy at any point. And so once that was over, I mean, that was, you know, very shortly after I met the man who eventually became my husband. And that was great because it was like one of the first times where I met someone out in the wild like one does and thought, oh my gosh, I can make friends with people now like a normal person. At the same time, Italy acquitted me of having anything to do with my roommate's murder, right? They did not say Amanda wasn't there. They left open the possibility that I was present when this crime occurred and that I witnessed it. And so what that meant, though, was that as soon as that idea remained, maybe she was there when it happened, it meant that I was the liar, that I was lying when I said I wasn't there, that I was keeping information from the world that would have revealed the truth of what had happened to my roommate, and I was just choosing not to tell it.
So earlier this year, Italy's Supreme Court upheld your conviction for slandering your former boss, Patrick Lumumba,
Yes.
during your interrogation.
Yes.
You had named him as being involved in the murder. Looking back now, what do you think was happening in that interrogation room, and why do you think you did that?
So what happened is the police, from the beginning, believed that the crime had been committed by someone who had access to the house. So they looked at this break-in that had happened. I called the police, reported a break-in, and my prosecutor, Giuliano Magnini, took one look at the crime scene and said, that is not a real break-in. That is a staged break-in. That is somebody trying to cover up for a crime. So assuming that, they then logically deduced that it was probably me, because I was the foreigner, I was the one who called, I was the first one to the crime scene, I was the one who was acting a little bit differently than other people, not realizing that I was the youngest and I didn't speak Italian, so I was struggling to understand what was going on. So from the beginning, the police and the prosecution were looking at me. No one else, they didn't tap their phones, they only tapped my phone. That's how we know. And then over the course of many days, they interviewed me, unbeknownst to me, more than anybody else. They brought me in for, I think, 53 hours of questioning over 5 days. So I was like inordinate amounts of time at the police's disposal, answering their questions over and over and over again. And what they were doing over the course of those days was trying to get me to say things that were inconsistent. So they would ask me, okay, what time did you last see Meredith? Or what time did you have dinner that night? And I was, doing my best, making guesses. I wasn't looking at my clock the entire time. And at a certain point, upon hearing that my mom was going to be arriving in Italy, they realized that they had a last chance to get me to confess. And so they brought me in, and my boyfriend, who was my alibi, in the middle of the night. They separated us, and then they started a guilt presumptive interrogation process where they accused us, they bullied us, they lied to us, they gaslit us. They broke my boyfriend first. Apparently, he said, well, maybe I fell asleep and I can't account for where she was after I fell asleep. They come in and tell me, your boyfriend says that you weren't with him that night. And they tell me that I must have witnessed the crime, and it was so horrible that I couldn't remember it. I must have blacked it out. But there was proof that I had met with my boss, Patrick Lumumba, the night of the murder, because they found a text message on my phone where I had texted him back saying, hey, have a good night, see you later. He had told me I didn't need to come in that night for work. They interpreted that see you later as an appointment to meet him and said that was proof that I had met him that night and that I was covering for him. So over the course of hours and hours of being screamed at and lied to and slapped in the back of the head, I started to doubt my own sanity, and I started to believe what they were telling me, that I must have witnessed this crime and didn't realize it. And so I signed statements to those effects after hours. And then they let me sleep. And once I woke up from a sleep, I immediately told them, this is all wrong. I need to change my statement. They said it was too late. And so I asked for a piece of paper and a pen, and I wrote what is called my memoriale. It was my retraction. I retracted what I said, and then they took me off to prison. And I remain convicted for that crime to this day, which to them, what their definition of this crime is that I knowingly and willingly falsely accused a man I knew for a fact to be innocent. And that I didn't commit that crime. But what I did do was sign false statements under coercion.
One of the most interesting things I think that you did also do is start writing to the man who prosecuted your case.
Yes.
In Italy, Giuliano Magnini. Someone who had been so certain of your guilt. Why did you start writing letters to him?
Yeah, that's a big part of the book. And all these years, as I've tried to process his impact on my life, I've experienced him as a kind of boogeyman. Here's this man who had so much power over me, who set a course for my life that I am now going to face the consequences of forever. I am forever proving my innocence in response to the accusations that he leveled against me, that in many ways derive from a certain kind of fantasy that he cooked up that was based on nothing. To give an example, his idea was that I had I was in a love triangle between the person who actually committed this crime, the murderer, Rudy Gaudet, and my boyfriend, Raffaele. So he imagined that I was in this love triangle when there is zero evidence. Like, I did not know Rudy's name. We did not have each other's phone number. No one ever saw us together. Like, this idea that we had this love triangle going on was completely made up for the sake of justifying his accusation against me. So I know this person to be very dangerous, but do I know this person? Do I understand this person? I wanted to understand why he believed, why he looked at a 20-year-old girl who had never had anything bad happen to her in her life, who had never hurt anyone, who had no history of violence or criminal behavior or even a bad grade in school, and thought, there's my rapist and murderer. Why? Why was this my life? Why did he do this to me? And I think anyone who is hurt can resonate with that. Like, if someone hurts you, you want to know why. And you want to know if they care. And you want to know if they're sorry. And so at a certain point, I was just like, I should ask him. And I knew that if I confronted him the way that I had always encountered him, which was in this adversarial justice system, I wasn't going to get anywhere. He's a lawyer. He wants to argue. He wants to debate. What would happen if I approached him not with, fisticuffs, but with an olive branch? I reached out to him and I tried to imagine any kind of common ground that we might have, which is what I think is the building blocks to any actual discussion that you might have with another human being. You have to have a foundation of common ground. And so recognizing that this case blew up in the media and went out of control, and everyone had their own opinion about it, and there were lots of different sides, I thought, I bet he feels misrepresented too. And so when I reached out to him, I said, Dr. Mignini, I don't know who you are. And I don't think you know who I am. And I think we both have been misrepresented. And I really want to know who you are, and I want to understand you. And he responded, and to his credit, he responded. Because another thing that he could have done was completely ignored me, and he didn't. And then finally, he started this discourse with me, and it just so happened to coincide with the pandemic. So my original intention of going there and meeting him in person and confronting him face to face was put on hold. And I don't know what you guys were doing during the pandemic, but I was corresponding with my prosecutor and talking about, the latest Star Trek episode with him and learning things about him outside of this criminal justice case that we had found ourselves enmeshed in. And he was deeply moved by the fact that I cared to know who he was and that I cared to give him the benefit of the doubt, to recognize his humanity, to be genuinely curious about him in ways that he had not been curious about me. And, another huge through line in the book is my relationship with my mother. This was the one time in her entire life where she did not want to support me. She did not want me to go back, and she did not understand this. She thought I was I had Stockholm syndrome or something. What is going, she was like, what are you doing? Why are you putting yourself back in danger? Why are you doing this to our family? Everything that this man has put us through, he is not worth it. And at the time, I didn't have the language to convey to her what I was attempting to do. I just had this deep feeling that I needed him to know who I was. And so I showed up. And, I don't want to give everything away. I hope you all get a copy of my book. But what I will say is that recognizing the humanity of another person or holding out an olive branch does not mean that you just forget about the bad things that they did to you. It does not. And it does not necessitate that. I showed up and I confronted him. I told him, you were wrong about me. I am innocent. And this is the level of pain that you have caused to me and my family and so many people that you do not know. But the flip side of that is that for me, Like, I said that, and then and you are a person who I genuinely believe thought he was doing the right thing. I think you believed what you were doing. And so I don't think that you are a bad person. And you know what? I don't even hate you. I actually, in a weird way, am grateful to you, because there are things that I know about myself in the world now because of you. I am a better person because of what you did to me, and because I have the opportunity now to confront you. And his response was really interesting. And again, you'll have to read the book. To go back to the mom of it all, I told my mom all about it afterwards, and her response was, too little, too late. Not good enough. And my response to my mom was, it's not about him anymore. It's not about what he said or he didn't say, what he did or what he didn't do. It was about me and what I did and what I said and how I showed up. It's not his story anymore. It's not his story to tell anymore. And when my mom finally heard that, and I think it really clicked for her that she understood what I was doing. But at the same time, as I talk about in my book, I'm a mom now too. The minute that my daughter was born, I recognized that my mom's pain throughout this entire process was more than anything that I experienced. She would have taken everything upon herself if she could have. And so her anger and inability to forgive my prosecutor was deeper than mine and different than mine. And both of those things are valid at the same time. We can hold each other up and we can hold each other's pain even though they're different and we have different ways of confronting them.
How do you say to your children, yeah, it's really bad? You know, that's,
Yeah.
We can recover, and we know when we can recover, but I can't assure you that the world works as it should.
Right, and sometimes we don't recover. There were 2 young women who went to go study abroad in Perugia, Italy, and only one of them survived to tell the tale. So sometimes we don't recover. And so far we haven't gotten into the nuance of that yet, because my daughter is 3. But she has started to ask me a lot about death. Because when I first started telling her about this story, I told her that someone hurt her friend. And everyone thought that Mama hurt her friend. But eventually she dug deeper into that and realized that my friend had died. And she didn't quite understand what that meant. And so we've had to have the conversation of dying is when there is no tomorrow. And I think she's still wrapping her brain around that. But to your point, it's going to take time for me to say, I will always be here for you, but that doesn't mean that the world is always going to be fair and that everything's always going to be all right. All I can tell you is that right now, in this moment, we are okay.
Well, I want to thank you very much, Amanda, for talking. This has been great. Thank you all very much for coming, and thank you again, Amanda.
Thank you.